Hello, it is 10 a.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in Johannesburg, and 9 p.m. in Bangkok. Welcome to In Transit with Sundae-Bean. I'm an intercultural strategist, transformation facilitator, and solution-oriented coach. And I am on a mission to help you adapt and succeed through any life transition. Way back when I was getting my honors thesis for my bachelor's degree, I had the honor, which I didn't know it was an honor at the moment, to be mentored by Dr. Carlin Corse Campbell. I was going to talk about how the media criticized women in politics and gave her my idea. I could talk about the first ladies, Elizabeth Dole and Hillary Clinton, and how the media criticized them differently. Went into my office with my first draft, and she had written notes on it. When I looked at my draft, this was, the old school days where it was in ink. There was red everywhere. I barely walked into the door. She handed the paper back and she said, "Good first start, but here's what we'll do instead." She loaded my arms up with books. And as I walked out, I realized they were all written by her. I had been mentored by one of the leading thinkers on the media's critique of women in politics. It was that moment that I realized this is an important woman in my life. This is a mentorship I shouldn't take for granted. We hadn't seen each other for months after she had helped me with my paper, and I learned that in that time in between, she had experienced loss. It was that moment again where I saw her in a totally new light. One, not just as a successful academic, but just a real woman. These are the impacts that mentors have on us. And I was so young then, and I didn't realize who was investing in me and just how much I should be appreciating that. So today's guest, I think, is that woman in many other people's lives. Terri Krivosha is here to share her story, not only of her mentoring, but being mentored in her career. From what I've heard from Terri, her life would start out, at least by my definition, as unconventional. And she leveraged her energy and direction to end up having an outstanding professional path. So thank you, Terri, for joining us today.
I'm delighted. Thank you, Sundae. I'm thrilled to be here.
So Terri, I'm going to tell a little bit our audience about your background and why you were so kind to agree to accept my invitation, but why
Sure.
I invited you to join today. So Terri and I had a conversation informally, and at the end of the conversation, I was struck by just listening to your journey, Terri, how you were sharing about your life, but really what it was about mentorship and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell the audience a little bit about Terri's professional background. Terri is a successful business attorney and a mediator. From what I've heard, she's known for how much she truly enjoys helping her shareholders, her family business owners, and companies. They're either buying or selling businesses or trying to solve some very large problems. She says the more complicated, the better. After years of experience in a wide variety of commercial transactions and businesses, she's now focusing her practices on M&A, restructuring, and shareholder, what are called business divorces, and mediation of commercial disputes. So, really an impressive career. I'm guessing, just based on what you've shared with me already, one that was quite a trendsetter for the time that you started. So do you mind, Terri, telling us a little bit about how you got started, why you got started to do what you do?
Yes, Sundae. Thank you very much. And I have to say that some of what I'm going to say, I really hadn't put together until you and I chatted the first time. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to kind of reframe and look back at my own past and understand how I got here, because I don't think we all do that very often. And sometimes we're afraid to. So I was pleased that I had that opportunity. I grew up in what I thought was the kind of home that everybody grew up in. I had a very, I guess maybe a conventional but unconventional unconventional parents. My dad, who passed away during the pandemic, was a lawyer and also the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Nebraska for several years. And he was really my first mentor. We had very strong ideas in our family of things that were important to us. I mean, I remember that before the first word I learned before I learned mother or father, I think, was Democrat. So that was the first. And I even remember when I went to kindergarten the first day, I met a little girl, and I came home and I said to my parents, I met this very nice girl today, but I'm a kindergarten now, 4. I was 4.5, but my mother couldn't wait to get me out of the house. I said, but her family is Republicans. Well, I said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, we had a conversation about it today in kindergarten, and we exchanged this information, and am I allowed to be friends with her? So the funny part is, it turns out her father was my dad's moot court partner. And the two of them had gone to law school together and had decided at the end of their law school days, he claims this is true. I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or not, but that they both wanted to get into politics, and they thought it didn't make sense for them to both be on the same side. So he claims they flipped a coin, which I don't believe. And he decided to be a Democrat, and his partner decided to be a Republican. In any event, they explained that I was allowed to be friends with her, and that would be fine. And so what I didn't realize about my dad is, when you grow up, you just think that every family is like your family. I mean, no family is any different. And my dad was really an innovator. We tried everything, right as it came out. We were early adopters. We had the first. I remember we had the first push button phones. We had the first microwave. When my father was on the court, he had this view that the people of Nebraska should be able to learn about what this Nebraska Supreme Court does. So his idea was, we're going to go out to all the different little cities, the court. We're going to go out and have dinner the night before, have a hot dish for everybody to eat. And then the next day, we're going to actually hold a session in their city so they can come and watch it and see what we do. Well, his brethren were having nothing of that. So I think what the most innovation he made on that was they sat at the law schools and some of those sorts of things. But those were the sorts of things that I just grew up with. He just was a big thinker, and he made me. I never remember having any sense of, I can't do what I want. I mean, there wasn't, and there wasn't any pressure on me to become a lawyer. There was just, learning was very important. Curiosity was very important. And just do what you love. I mean, that's the part that came through.
So Terri, this is what I find is interesting, because I think you and I might have been given similar messages, or at least as a child absorbed those messages similarly, in terms of feeling supported by your parents, that you can do anything, but having your parents believe in you. However, I'm from a small Midwestern town. I didn't have any female role models that I could look to that were doing big things around me that were unconventional, which I think is, I don't know about you, but it sounds like early on when you had that idea, I could do this, the spaces that you entered were completely male dominated.
Well, they were, but now as I'm thinking about this, there was a woman who was the mayor of, I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, was the mayor of Lincoln. And I remember she was friends with my father, and I didn't think anything of the fact that, that she was a woman. I really just didn't think about it. And to the point where once I told my son, when he was maybe 7 or 8, your grandfather is also a lawyer just like me. And he looked at me and he said, well, he can't be. Only girls can be lawyers. I mean, this is my son.
I love that.
So, I mean, he had made that association. It's just interesting. I don't know how, but so I had never made it. So
that says so much, doesn't it, about how important it is for our kids when they see something that they think it's possible?
Yeah. Yeah. So I just, it never, I mean, and I say that law was my family business. I grew up waiting for juries. My mother was a more traditional mom, but she also did unusual things. Her field was teaching individuals who had trouble learning how to read. She had a lot of training in dyslexia. She could diagnose it and then worked with them. And when my father was a judge, she taught prisoners how to read. So we sort of joked that she taught, the burglars to become embezzlers. But she was also passionate about what she did, and to the point where there were people that came back to them. They had people in their lives that they had impacted who would often just appear, passing through, wanted to stop and give you a hug. And I found out when my father died, the number of people that he actually touched in his life, which was, I just had absolutely no idea. I just thought he was, like I said, a regular dad. And I realized as I've reflected on this, so when I started college, I went to both Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary. I grew up in a small town. I was very interested in Judaism, wanted to get more knowledge, and this program at Columbia and JTS would give me the opportunity to do 2 BAs. So my mentor at JTS, at the time, was the only woman Talmud scholar really in the world. Wow. And I had no idea. I mean, she was pregnant at the time, but I didn't think anything of it. I knew she was the first, but I just sort of took that in, like, okay, if she can be the first, then I can be the first.
That's beautiful.
And I guess that's what happened. I mean, and I really didn't realize till the earlier conversation we had how many women I had been influenced by as I was, going through my education. So she was one. Judith Houtman was her name. She eventually went on to become a rabbi, but she was a Talmud scholar before anything. And I admired her, and I admired her ability to just, I think she was pregnant with twins at the time, and continue to teach us. And she was the one that really, so really what the Talmud is, I think it's either 2,571 or 2,751 pages, both sides. It's a folio page. Of really Jewish law. And I'm actually now part of an international book club, call it, where every day we do a page. And our cycle started in January of 2020. 7.5 years later, we've gone through the entire thing, which is kind of fun because then it was started by somebody 100 years ago to give Jews something to talk about when they met each other, as if we'd have any trouble. But anyway, we just talk long enough to another Jewish person, you realize you've got a second cousin or something. But anyway, so what it opened up for me was this vast this legal discussion that goes on every day on the page. And then there's commentaries around it that explain. And she just opened me up to this world. So it was sort of like what I was going to study in law school, but it was in Aramaic and Hebrew. And so I thought this will be a good pre-law. So that was my major. And at the same time, I was doing a ancient history major because I'm just fascinated by this whole period, Second Temple, and kind of on like 4th, 5th, 6th century AD, where as these different academies of rabbis were being established, both in Babylonia and in Israel. And so that was the area I focused on at Columbia. And I also had a woman advisor who didn't do what you said your mentor did, but she was
a lot better than I did, I think.
but I looked at her and I thought, well, look, she's been able to succeed. I guess what I didn't understand at the time is I was seeing these female role models, and I didn't feel daunted by them.
Right.
I didn't feel like there aren't enough of them. So I guess I never felt like a pioneer or, those sorts of things. I mean, I wasn't even quite sure. I remember when I was younger what a feminist was, because I wasn't like demonstrating and doing those sorts of things. I saw examples of how women could be successful, and I figured I could do that too.
It's beautiful. So it should be, regardless of where you identify on the gender spectrum, it should just be like, hey, let's do this, regardless of the
right? Yeah, my family gave me a lot of confidence. I mean, I hope they didn't give me too much, but they made me realize, I'm never scared of doing something new, and I'm a lifelong learner. Yeah. So, a few years ago, I'd always been told by opposing counsel in deals that I'd be a great mediator. So I decided a few years ago to get qualified as a mediator, which I thought would be fun. So, it's just a different part of my brain that I'm trying to work with right now as I'm continuing to develop my practice. And then I started at a big law firm in New York City, Paul Weiss. It was Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison at the time. And my mentor there was the only woman in the only woman partner, I think, at the time. Maybe there was one other partner, but she was the first woman partner at Paul Weiss.
Yep.
And again, I didn't think, oh, they've assigned her to me because I'm a woman. I just looked at her and I watched her negotiate. And that was in the days when that's what you did. You actually sat at the feet of your mentors in a room with other people and you just watched what they did. And I just absorbed it, and then they gave you little things to do that were, it was an apprenticeship, right?
Right.
And I'm still in touch with her. I mean, she has now retired, and I have gone back throughout my career to make sure she knew what I was up to and to tell her how grateful I was for what she did for me.
That's so beautiful. And so this is where I find, maybe this is just where I am in my life, but right now, when I think about it, I look at the opportunities. I've been so lucky to be in the same room as some brilliant people, right?
Yes.
And where my hindsight comes in is I don't know at that age if I fully appreciated who I was in the room with. Very simple example, but for example, I am trained in personal leadership. They call it PL. And this was back in 2004, 2005. I did this course through the Summer Institute of Intercultural Communication. And years later, I was talking to someone and they featured someone who was trained in PL. And I said, oh, I'm trained in PL. And it was like this big deal, this approach to leadership and cross-cultural communication. I'm like, oh yeah. Barbara Shetty and Gordon Watanabe, they were my people who taught me. And I didn't realize I was sitting at the feet of the people who created this methodology. And this is the same thing with Dr. Collis Campbell, Dr. Judith Martin. I've been in spaces where I knew I had something to learn, but I didn't quite grasp what an opportunity that was. So I'm just wondering, with the benefit of hindsight, right? Maybe that's wisdom as we get older and process this. If we could give people advice, what they could do to more intentionally nurture their relationship with people who are mentors.
Hard. So that's hard because when I think back, Sundae, I realized I didn't have any idea how important these people were. And I'm not sure I realized until recently.
Yeah.
I think, so there's a couple of things. And I remember when I was graduated from law school, we graduated, they held our graduation at Lincoln Center, which was a beautiful place to have graduation. And I was in the car, in the cab with my dad, and they wanted my dad he was Chief Justice of Nebraska that time. They thought it would be nice for him to march in the thing, and he got to hood me. And he turned to me as we were in the car, I'm going to cry now. And he said, get yourself a mentor. He said, if you do nothing else, get yourself a mentor. And I guess I followed that, but I didn't really reflect on it. Again, I thought, okay, my dad told me to get a mentor. I got a few. So first of all, I guess the advice I would give to someone who's looking for a mentor now is you have to do the reaching out. I mean, I think I certainly did that when I was younger. I mean, what I would say to these people are, I want to work with you. I'll do anything, I'll write up your notes. Let me sit in conversations with you. And what I say to our young lawyers now is, I'm happy to help you, but I'm not very good at reaching out. Find me, and I'm happy to get you involved in what I'm doing to help you learn, or happy to have separate conversations with you. So I would say one of the things you need to do, as a younger person, or even a person who's looking for mentors, it doesn't matter what age you are, initiate some of those conversations. Be ambitious. Look at people who are doing what you want to do, regardless of who they are, and then figure out how to learn from them. And there's all different ways you can learn from them. And then sometimes though, and I think we talked about this when you and I last talked, you have to know when it's time to fire a mentor. And that's hard too, right? I mean, I had two very, very influential mentors who were men over my career. And so I didn't only have women mentors, but sometimes you get to a point, and I've seen this happen with people that I've mentored. You just get to a point where they're on their own. You know, you wish them good luck. You might continue to work in the same firm maybe, or they go somewhere else. And that's kind of it. Just you leave it, and you've given them what you can, and they've taken what they can. So you know, you get to a point sometimes where a mentor wants to be too involved, and you have to say to them kindly, thank you for everything you've done for me, but it's time for me to leave the nest now.
Yep. Well, I think that breaches actually I think it's a breach of how you would define a mentor, because when you start telling people what to do, you're consulting. A mentor helps you find your answers and provides obviously direction and support, right? Like it's
fair
when they're too involved, right?
Yeah.
And it's like they've started to go too far.
And I guess it's that boundaries that all of us have difficulty with. And I think it's even harder in this world where boundaries are so fuzzy.
Right.
But I found it important. I mean, I always like it when people reach back out to me to say, you know, I just wanted to thank you for what you've done. I always felt it was important for my mentors.
Yes.
You know, my every time I was in New York, after I left New York, I would call up my mentor from Paul Weiss and take her to lunch, and it was just fun to connect with her and just kind of remember the wisdom I had learned from her. I once was giving a talk and I wanted to just pick her brain about something. So I said, let's go out to lunch. You know, what do you think about X? So you have to work hard, though, to keep those people in your life, because if they're the right kind of mentors, they don't stay in your life. You know, they just don't. They don't. And that's what I think part of being a good mentor is. You just have to let the people that you've helped go.
And that's where I think when we spoke last, I had this idea of you should nurture a mentoring relationship and keep them in your life. And actually what we've just talked about now is grow through the mentorship relationship.
I think so.
And reestablish another relationship.
Somebody else.
Yes.
Because I think what happens is the idea with the mentor, right, is that you're going to grow.
Yes.
A mentor sees you often at the place you came to them. And I think it's hard for them to realize sometimes you've grown. Right. It happens pretty naturally if you just let it, you know. In a law firm, for example, you're second chairing a deal or a case, and you get to be experienced enough where you're not working with that person anymore. You don't need to be a second chair. You're now a first chair. So sometimes it just happens naturally. But I think it's hard for a mentor often to take you out of kind of that role they first saw you in. And so my view has been you learn what you can from them, and then you move on. And mentors can go any way up and down. You know, you can have younger mentors. You can have, you know, when you're younger, usually they're more experienced. But I've learned a lot of things from my, you know, younger colleagues as well. There's a wonderful saying in the Talmud that says, much I have learned from my teachers, much I have learned from my colleagues, but the most I have learned is from my students. And so you learn something as a mentor, and then it's just time to go on.
Right. So it makes me ask, you know, what do mentors get from the relationship? And I think you've already begun to answer that.
Yeah. Right? And it's funny because I was always very interested in this issue of mentorship at my law firm and just in general. I think what you get from it is a relationship and an ability to, in an informal way, kind of teach somebody your craft. I mean, what we do in my world, I mean, when I'm a mentor to somebody, they're an apprentice essentially. And so you're really trying to pass on how you do things. And I, I think and what I encourage my mentees to do is to take everything they're hearing and learning and seeing and make it their own.
Yes.
Figure out how to make it your own style. You're not going to be a Terri, and you're not going to be a so-and-so, and you're not going to be a so-and-so, but your negotiation style will be an amalgam of the people that you meet.
Yep. So I wanted to go back to advice for people who are in the mentee position. And one of the things when I was listening to you, I reflected on my younger self. And I think the advice that I would give is to slow down. I think when I was in a situation where I had these amazing people in front of me, I was very focused on the task or mastering the knowledge,
right,
or the skill. And in that speed, in that hyper focus, I might have missed the relationship aspect of it.
Well, I think that's true, but I'm just wondering if that's the way it is. I mean, I think about it, and each, generations are always off from one another, right? Like, that the old adage about saying to your kid, you'll know this when you're a parent. I mean, they do, right? And so it's not, Sundae, you're giving good advice. I'm not sure how possible it is, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure your younger self could have been less focused on the tasks and more focused on sort of the people whose footsteps you were sitting at. I'm not sure I'm wondering if you can only do that in retrospect.
Right.
Because when I think about Judith Hauptman, who was truly the first woman Talmud scholar, I didn't know what to do with that except learn from her. Right. I mean, so she was my first Talmud scholar. She taught me what Talmud was. And so part of it, so I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure how possible it is.
I don't know if it's possible either. This is the question that plagues me, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So I have this project called Wisdom Fusion. It's a group of, intergenerational women from 20 to 75 plus, and we've communed together in this learning experience and shared. And my question is, can we come together and share in a way that we can help either one person avoid a train wreck that others have had, or take more out of a situation than they would if left by their own default, right? That's the question that
I see. The answer to that is probably yes, because if you had a little person sitting on your shoulder during those times when you were sitting at the feet of these people, the person whispering on your shoulder would say, take her to lunch and just let her tell you about her life and what was important to her.
Yes.
How did she get where she is today? Those were the things we didn't do. And maybe those are the kinds of things. I mean, that's the being so focused, right? I want to get my senior thesis done. I want to make sure that, I learn everything I can. I mean, I didn't want to go to her office hours, my Talmud teacher, and talk to her about her life. I wanted to talk about the page we're doing today and why I didn't understand the commentaries.
Yes.
But, and so maybe that can be changed, but it has to be, I think, somebody like you're trying to do saying, take stock of this now, because later on, you don't want to have missed opportunities that you had earlier.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Or like that moment that I had in Dr. Course Campbell's office, where I was able to hear something from her private life that was so profound and see her in a new way. And I'm shy to even talk about this because she's still alive. I've reached out to her to try to reconnect, and I don't want to be talking behind her back. So if she's listening, I want to honor you. I'm not trying to talk behind your back. My point is, in that moment, she set a precedent for what was possible that shifted my life entirely. Right.
So I hear you. I mean, it's almost anytime you run into somebody who you sort of is a mentor in the grocery store, or you see them jogging in the morning. I mean, this is such a funny memory. So I was in college when there was a subway strike in New York that caused women to start wearing sneakers to work. And I remember that. And it was a mess. I mean, people lived all over. Nobody could get anywhere. And I remember the woman who was my professor and my thesis advisor. And it was during the strike. And I remember her wearing sneakers with her, more formal clothes, because that's what she had walked to work from the East Side that day. And I walked into her office and she was on the phone with her husband, asking him to take some cheese out of the freezer because they were having company for dinner. And I remember thinking, oh my God, she eats too. I mean, so do you know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
And I remember, I mean, how many years ago that was? 40 years. I mean, it made me realize, yes, she's just a real person, So I guess the message is find these people and invite them to share more things with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? That's, I think, what it is. Identify them, find them, learn from them, and try to get them in some informal situations where they can I want to hear about your life, because that's where you'll learn. And just ask those questions, even though you don't realize you should. I mean, I don't, if somebody had said to me, take Judith Hauptman to lunch and just ask her to tell you about why she decided to become a Talmud scholar, I would have looked at them and said, are you out of your mind? But I think our younger generation is more brash, probably, and a little more willing to take some of those sorts of risks, and you can learn a lot. So
I think it's fascinating. I think and the whole point for me is about how do we be intentional, and how do we be intentional about nurturing a relationship? How do we be intentional about also not exploiting a relationship, right? One is, how do I nurture this relationship? But then how do I not exploit it? Because one of the things, for example, in my business, mentoring would be interesting because I am a coach and a consultant, right? And I'm also a certified mentor coach for the coaching field. So when are you asking someone for a service, and when are you just nurturing a relationship? And I think that is interesting. The other point that I think is interesting is when is it imbalanced, right? Because you're busy. Even with you, I was like, do you have time? I didn't want to assume that you and I could hop on a call or that you would do an interview because you've got so many things in your life. So can you tell me a story maybe about a time where you felt like the mentorship was imbalanced, and a time where it felt right? Like, what did the person do? What did the mentee do well? And maybe what did the other mentee not do well?
Oh, I see. Okay. So let's do what they did well first, because that's going to be easier for me to think about. I mean, it is so rewarding for me to see lawyers that I would say I've nurtured as they've been kind of going through, seeing them progress to leadership roles. And then what I love is when they call me to say, I got to pick your brain about this. I love that. Right. I mean, I'm proud of them. And there's one mentee, and I have we have a call every Friday. It's at 1:30. It's just supposed to be like a 5-minute kind of, what are you working on? What are you working on? How can we help each other? It usually evolves into something else, so that's, it's intentional. It doesn't always happen. I mean, Friday I was visiting my grandchildren. We didn't meet. So, but it was the setting of a time, and she's well into her career now. So it's part of it is just connecting. Right. So I like that.
What I'm hearing is, you said the criteria that came up for you that I heard was, it's intentional. It's predictable in terms of like we know about accountability. If you schedule it and it's, shared in advance, you're more likely to hold that, right? And the third one is it's flexible. So if you are doing something else, you're not going to let it dominate your day, right? So those are some things that I'm hearing from you work with that mentorship. I've also heard is that it's grown into mutually supportive, because she's well into her career. So the mentorship dynamic has also grown as she's grown as a professional.
Yeah. And that's the only, I've only have one person that's happened with, really, in that way. I guess the doing wrong is, and it's not, I mean, I'm not criticizing my mentees for this. I struggle when I work very hard with them and then they leave my firm. That's been hard for me over the years. There have been 2 or 3 that, and I wish them well. I hope they do well. Nobody likes to feel rejected.
Yeah.
And so, and so I'm not saying they could have done anything differently, and it's hard to know when you invest in someone at the beginning, where's that going? Right. And I'm never a person that likes to think about that. So I would say that's a, I don't know if it's a failing or just a challenge for me to figure out how to, and it's not that I didn't want them to do what their calling was, right? It's just, you spend a lot of time investing in people, and sometimes the parting is difficult.
Right. I hear that. It makes me think about, with this idea of mentorship, we talked about both directions that you've said you've learned as well from your mentees. And that's part of this whole thing that I do with Wisdom Fusion. I think that we are taught that wisdom is always from the elders to the youngers. Especially not true now with our technology changing and everything changing. What I've realized is so interesting. Those who were mentoring me when I was in my 20s, now I'm in my 40s. Like, I'm a grown ass adult now. Do you know what I mean? And I might have learned something and have expertise in something that now I could actually teach the people who were teaching me then. That the age difference feels big when you're 20 and they're maybe even 35.
Smaller.
It gets so much smaller, right? I think people need to keep that in mind too. Also as a mentor, but also as a mentee, that in the beginning, when you're mentoring younger people, they grow up and that gap minimizes.
Well, so I think and I think the other thing is, there's this whole concept of mentoring up or managing up.
Yes.
I mean, I like to think that I've spent a lot of time trying to suggest things that for other people to think about. That I don't know if it's mentoring or not, but it's just trying to share what I know. But I think that's right. It's a whole different world now. I mean, I think it was starting to get there before the pandemic, and that just like put it on steroids, and now it's we're there.
And that's why I want to have this conversation, because I think we need to keep looking at old topics in new ways and new topics in old ways, right?
Agreed. Yeah,
so
totally.
Mentorship, like how can we look at mentorship with fresh eyes? You and I didn't have any of this thought out in advance. We're working through this together right now.
Right.
And it's also an invitation for people who are listening to think about how do they want to be showing up as a mentee or as a mentor? What are some other ways I can look at it? Who am I selecting as mentors? Is that the best people to learn from? Right. So do you mind if we shift a little bit more to you? Because I'm curious, your journey, where you've come from to where you are now. I would love to hear, you mentioned the last few years, what transitions, I have this thing called ATT, ambitious transformation and transition. What transitions are you feeling right now, regardless of whether it's professional or personal? I'd love to hear from you.
Well, so part of it is, I think what I realized professionally was that I wanted to do more of what I like. And so I have really thought about what are the parts of my practice I really enjoy, and what are the parts that I want to refer to some of my other colleagues. And I went so far as to revise my my bio, and I decided I wanted to become a mediator, and did that as well. And so I would say a transition is really kind of, to put just very specific words on it, I used to do a lot of general counsel work, which means people would come to me and I would help them with all their different things in their business. I enjoyed that, but I didn't enjoy it so much. I wanted to continue doing it. So there are other people that I can send that sort of work to. And I'm really trying to focus on the things that I really like. So which is mergers and acquisitions, and helping people buy and sell businesses, helping people solve conflict within their companies, help them restructure, help them, align their goals with how they want to grow, and really helping them solve problems through mediation. I mean, what I like to say is that, I'm good at solving conflict as long as it's not my own.
Exactly. That's awesome.
It's like the cobbler's kids have no shoes, but I'm kind of kidding about that. But,
right.
I don't mind. Many people mind conflict, and I don't
right.
mind it at all.
Right.
What I like to do is dig and get underneath it. So I think the transition that I'm seeing in myself is how I approach problems, whether in my work life or in my personal life, and trying to kind of take a step back and really look at them and be more intentional about how I'm dealing with kind of all the things that are going on in my life.
That's so interesting. So when we think about, so those are the things that are moving and changing, where do you feel called? And maybe transformation doesn't fit where you're at right now. But if you were to pick, like, are you feeling pulled by something internal, something external, like all the things that are happening in the world, or even a performance goal? Where are you feeling one of those types of transformations in your life right now?
Well, for me, it's usually internal. My husband will tell you, you've spoken to my husband, I'm a very competitive person. It's just part of who I am. But it's mostly internal. I compete sort of with myself. I mean, I'm a very intense person. And so part of it is sort of trying. So it's always internal. I would say it's always, I'm really not driven ever by what other people think of me. Thank goodness. I've just never been driven by that. It's really more, what do I want to be doing now in my life? And what do I want to be focusing on? And how do I want to look at that landscape? So.
Right. I love that you said in competition with myself, because that is 100% how I see it for me.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. There's a song, it is this gorgeous song called Da Da Ding. And I have to think about who the artist is, but it's one of the lines in there. It's like, I am in competition with myself. And that is, I don't know if people can understand that. People, I think, often misread that as competitive with others, but it's like, you're not looking in anybody else's lane.
Like, what do you mean? I can't do that. I mean, I'm trying to, if I want to do this, how am I going to do it? And if I think I can do it, then gosh darn it, I'm going to just go full stream ahead and try and get it done. So
yeah, you've obviously proved that to be true.
I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
So when I talk about ambitious transformation, I for me, and this might be similar to you, it has to be your own definition of ambition outside of scope or scale of someone else, right?
Correct.
So for me personally, I always give the example that doing less is ambitious for me.
Oh, yeah.
So when we're recording this, I'm trying to calm down in my business for 9 weeks, because I have a lot of other things in transit in my life right now, including a global move. So doing less is ambitious. And it's like every day I have to wake up and say, it's okay, you're not doing more. Like, that's the hard thing for me. So what's ambitious for you right now?
Yeah. And that would be ambitious for me also. I mean, I'm probably not there yet. I mean, what's ambitious for me? I'm very focused on my Talmud. You want me to tell you specifically?
Just in general, whatever makes sense for you.
Well, I have some new things I'm really interested in that I want to pursue. Like I said, I'm a lifetime learner. So, I mean, I want to do more mediations. I'm developing some, I keep looking for a study source I want for my Talmud learning, and I can't find it anywhere. So I said, you know what, I can do this. All the pieces are there. It's just a matter of putting them together in the way that will help me as I'm learning, because it's a very fast paced kind of study. I mean, what's ambitious for me is to, also think about how to take more time, how to be less distracted.
So interesting. So you're right now, what is it that you're working on with intention that you're excited about right now?
my husband and I have a place in Israel, and we can finally travel there again. So I'm excited about kind of spending more time there and trying to kind of see what that's going to look like. So,
wonderful.
And spending time with my grandchildren. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I do. Yeah. And just to sort of reflect on everything that we've talked about today, it's been interesting to focus on this idea of our own personal, professional transformations and the roles that people have had that are either intentional and clear, or people who've come out of or come into our lives in ways that we didn't realize would have such a profound impact. So I love that. My ask or invitation for the listeners is to think about, like what you and I did, Terri, the first time we spoke, is to go back and look at who are the people that you have been mentored by, whether you were aware of it or not, right?
Yeah.
Because that's meaningful. And I think it gives us something. And also I think, as if you are a mentor, be mindful of how have you shown up for other people, intentionally or consciously or not, that has been meaningful. Yeah. The other thing, what I did right before we got on our call is I looked up my mentor from my honors thesis. And I'm so grateful. She's much older than she was than when I met her. And so am I. And I'm grateful that I reached out and said, hey, I have something I want to tell you about 25, 30 years ago. And so hopefully she'll get the message. I actually teared up when I wrote that message because I want to make sure that she knows the profound impact that she had in my life.
That's the thing. I mean, I don't think the people who have had a profound impact on us will ever know that to that extent. And anytime we can tell them, I think it makes them feel wonderful.
Yep. So that's my homework assignment for everybody listening.
Excellent.
Write your mentors. Tell them what they mean.
Perfect.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to In Transit with Sundae-Bean. I am so grateful you're here. I will leave you with the words from Simone Sinek. A mentor is not someone who walks ahead of us and tells us how they did it. A mentor is someone who walks alongside us to guide us on what we can do.